When times are tough, we can agonize or we can organize. And times are tough in Florida. And I'm so glad that Fed kind of got us back to the basics of what we do and who we are in this room. But think about it. Floridians love public schools, yet the legislature and the governor are fixated on how to take money away from them. Education was the top issue for voters, and polling right before the legislative session demonstrated that people want to increase funding for public schools and overwhelmingly chose to invest in neighborhood public schools rather than vouchers and privatization. And when I say overwhelmingly, by 42 points. Yet, the legislature introduced a new voucher program that will take $1 billion away from public schools over the next 5 years. Think about something else. Communities across this state, as I said, want to invest in strong neighborhood public schools. We saw that with the more than 20 school levies that were passed last year to increase funding for teacher salaries, for school security, for all sorts of other public school issues, rural, suburban, urban. Republican and Democrat passed those levies. But the legislature tried to change that. They tried to thwart the will of communities and claw back the referendum money that voters overwhelmingly approved for their local schools. So much for Tallahassee believing in local control. And it was the parents and the educators who banded together, led by Palm Beach, led by Dade, led by FEA, led by people in this room, and you stopped the legislature from enacting that plan and the horrible consequences. But even with the increase of funding for public schools, which look, I know we suffered a lot in this session, but it was an increase of $75 as compared to the increase of 47 cents last year. But even with that, Tallahassee simply wants a Betsy DeVos agenda of austerity, of austerity and privatization. And if you simply follow the money trail, it will expose the reality of who's in charge in Tallahassee. So, our work is cut out for us. And as I said before, we can agonize or we can organize. And I suspect you come up to Orlando or down to Orlando or west or east to Orlando, everyone in this room wants to organize, am I right? And organizing around the schools our students deserve, am I right? And those schools need to be public, am I right? So, to organize around public schools, to engage everyone who cares about our students, our families, and our communities, and to make the case that public schools, as Fed just said, are foundational of democracy and foundational to the equalization and to the future of Florida. It starts here and it starts now. So frankly, as I said before, the public is with us. Our challenge, and Fed just said it too, is to ensure that the politics in Tallahassee matches the public sentiment in our communities. FEA and parents and faith leaders and so many others were key to the additional funding, to beating back the clawback, as I call it. You did it by not just making it overwhelmingly clear that the public opposed the brazen power grab. You did it with message, but you also did it in the streets, in phone calls, in visits to the legislature. This is probably the most important thing I'm going to say to you. Tallahassee knew that you knew what was going on. You exposed it, they couldn't hide, and they capitulated. That is the kind of thing we have to do on steroids, right? So, We need to get to a place where every legislative session is not an existential threat to public education. Instead of constantly fighting the bad bills, we need to have leaders in that legislature who are coming to us to say, how can we fund our future? How can we have the freedom to teach? How can we have the music and the art and the debate and the sports programs that we need? How can we lower class size? How can we help special needs children? That is what we need in the legislature, and we need them to be a majority in the legislature. And you know, about Democrat versus Republican versus independent. That needs to be a Democratic position, a Republican position, and an independent position. Because simply put, it is about making every public school in Florida a school that parents want to send their kids to, a school that educators want to teach at, and a school where our children thrive. Isn't that right? And we got to do the same in public higher education, which has been defunded as well. Isn't that right? So, how are we going to do it? And this is what I want to leave you with. Because what we have faced in Florida today reminds me of what we faced in Michigan, where for years, right-wing, anti-public education, anti-union politicians, and wealthy interests held a stranglehold in the state. It's the state that is home to Betsy DeVos, and where she used her wealth to push her agenda to make it a laboratory of failed education policies. First, she bankrolled a voucher referendum that voters rejected by a 2-to-1 margin. Then she bankrolled a bunch of candidates who would do her bidding in the governor's mansion and in the state house, pushing measures to defund public schools, pushing measures for tax breaks for the wealthy, diverting money from public schools for-profit charters, and other privatization measures. Does that sound familiar? At the same time, politicians in Michigan were eviscerating labor rights and using Detroit's bankruptcy as a guise to take away local control, to gut unions, to dismantle public education in that city. And it wasn't just Detroit. In Flint, the same elimination of local control led to emergency managers who led to the poisoning of the water. And by the way, not only did Betsy DeVos use her wealth to donate to the right-wing organizations pushing for emergency managers, she also used the Flint water crisis to sell boxed water she owned, so she made a profit off of people suffering. Just calling it out, just telling you the facts. So Michigan, soon thereafter, earned the nickname as the Wild West of for-profit charter schools because of the lack of accountability, because of their reckless behavior, because of their failed results. At the height of all of this, 80% of the state's charters were for profit. These charters, get this fact, lagged 84% behind state averages in math scores and 80% behind state averages in reading scores. And nearly half the charters in Michigan ranked among the bottom of all of America's schools. A year-long investigation by the Detroit Free Press revealed rampant corruption, cronyism, and poor performance in the state's charter schools. No doubt, a real examination of the two big charter chains in Florida would reveal something similar. So, I'm telling you, giving you facts, DeVos's agenda was a failure for kids and for educators. In 2003, Michigan ranked 28th in the nation in fourth grade reading. By 2015, after she had had 10 years of work, the state ranked 41st. In 2015, the state ranked 42nd in fourth grade math, again, down from 27 in 2003. And teacher pay fell 10% in Michigan while DeVos was pushing her agenda. Why am I telling you this? Because we organized, we took to the streets, we took to the airwaves, we took to social media, we took to the courts, we took to the ballot box. all of us together, like in this room. We had a message about public schools, and we had a mission to make sure it was heard. We reconnected with community, and we built community inside and outside our union. Central to this effort was the coalition in Detroit and across the state between our national union, our state federation, locals, parents, community groups, faith leaders, pastors, other allies, including, very consciously, Republicans and independents. And together we developed a shared agenda for our public schools that had the buy-in in a real way in community. And we ran campaigns that galvanized teachers, students, parents, and neighborhoods around school conditions, around funding, around restoring local control. And after the campaigns congealed locally, we brought them to the Capitol. It wasn't easy. And there were days, ask Fed, ask Andrew, they were part of our leadership as we went through this. There were days I thought we would lose. There were days we were pulling our hair out. There were days we were crying. And in Detroit, though, we won back local control. We won back an elected school board. And yes, we keep on building. It's not perfect. We had 500 people at a school board meeting this week, and that was the same week we had a packed audience with Kamala Harris in one of our town halls. But what you're seeing is activism on fire in Michigan right now. Little by little, we gained ground. There were setbacks, there were losses, but we persisted on this righteous path. And then, November 2018, we elected an AFT member who is now governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. We swept statewide races. We picked up seats in the state Senate and the House. All of our endorsed candidates won their state education board seats, and we picked up a seat on the Supreme Court. And while we lost this election in Florida by a hair, by 30,000 votes, in Michigan, where Gretchen ran on a campaign of public education, public higher education, and fix the damn roads, she won by 10 points. And now, her first policy proposal was a $507 million increase in state K-12 spending, with resources targeted to schools and students in the most need. And on and on and on. So, years of massive disinvestment in public schools by the state, diverting money from public schools to privatization, wealthy interests bankrolling politicians to move an agenda at odds with what community wants. And after all, Michigan might be DeVos's home state, but Florida is her second home. An attempt to strip away local control, going after teacher voice. Again, sounds familiar? It's the same playbook. But this is not isolated. In Pennsylvania, another place where a right-wing governor came to power with an agenda to defund public education and take away voice, he stripped Philadelphia of local control. He instituted a state-controlled board that went after teachers and their unions. He defunded public schools. He pushed privatization. Corbett cut $1 billion and tried to put the rest of the state against Philadelphia and pit one against each other. Guess what happened? Tom Wolf is now the governor of Pennsylvania, not Mr. Corbett. And last, look what just happened in LA, where for years Eli Broad and millionaires poured their fortunes in to control the school board and public education. The LA strike didn't just happen overnight, and I'm not proposing a strike here or anything else, at least not right now. But it happened through organizing and through an agenda of what public schools need and deserve. It created a paradigm shift. And just this week, Jackie Goldberg won the school board seat, and now that school board is a pro-public education school board. You saw it? So my point is this. Why do I keep saying we? because the AFT has been a partner in all of these fights. It's not just the staff you see. We show up with money, we show up with support, because this is about saving public education in our country, higher education and K-12, pre-K-12 education. But I'm going to end here, because my point is this. I tell you these examples because don't you think there were rooms like this where people were saying, oh, it can't be done. Oh, we can't do it. Oh, my God, they got so much power. Excuse me for invoking God, Pastor. You know, it's my Sabbath. I'm going to see my partner, who is a congregational rabbi, so I feel like I can invoke God today, okay? But my point is this. If we join together, you notice, I didn't tell you what your agenda should be. I got a whole lot of ideas about what we should be doing in public education. But this is your agenda. This is your day. This is your summit. It's creating a value system. It's taking values to actions. You have those values. It's creating values to actions. What our kids need, what our teachers need, what our communities need, what do we need in K-12, what we need in higher education, and then putting it together as a righteous organizing path that mobilizes in our local communities, that mobilizes in Tallahassee, that doesn't let them get away in small little rooms to fight for charters instead of public schools, to fight for vouchers instead of public schools, to fight for the rich instead of the people in this room and who we represent. You can do it because together we can do what is impossible to do alone. The issue is, are you ready? Are you ready to organize? Are you ready to mobilize? Are you ready to be the street fighters for public education, for higher education, for our kids, for our teachers and our communities? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Thank you.